Iran is not going to be allowed to lose. There will be no defeat of Iran. So if we double down on this, as I'm sure we'll try to do, we won't have any choice because we're going to be the recipients of retaliation. It's not going to work.
So Douglas Macgregor was recently on George Galloway's podcast talking a little bit about how he believes that the Iran war is just beginning and that it would be a long, hard slog even if the U.S. gets more involved than it already has. It's already bombed Iran. And especially that's because of who will come to Iran's aid. So let's check out what he has to say about that. Let's watch, let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Colonel, if they'd consulted you before last night, what would your advice have been to them?
Well, there wouldn't have been a strike, and we would not now be at war with Iran. And I think the most important thing for your audience to understand is something that most Americans don't understand, George. The United States is now at war with Iran as Israel's critical and ultimately only real ally. It's very important to understand that because this is something that Israel, its lobby, and ultimately its agents in the United States have tried to bring on for 30 years. They've now achieved it, which explains why Mr. Netanyahu last night was almost giddy in his response. He knows that he's finally got what he wants because this war is going to expand. It's going to take time. How long is anyone's guess that it could have terrible consequences? So I think there was a failure at the policy-making level to understand what they were doing. And if you listen to Trump, this is not a man who wants the war. And so instead of a strike going in, even though this had been rehearsed for innumerable times over many years, even though they'd rehearsed it and practiced it, what they ultimately did was harm nothing and accomplish nothing. They hit the equivalent of empty buildings, empty targets. And then after doing so, he announced that he was now ready for peace, which is the ultimate expression of self-delusion. He now has a full-blown war on his hands. But until the Americans are hurt in some demonstrable way, most Americans will not understand this. And they don't understand it, George.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with much of what Macgregor says here. I'm totally with him as far as this is a disaster. I'm with his approach more that if he was in charge, there wouldn't have been a strike. Disengagement was the right course here. But instead, Trump collaborated with Netanyahu. Here's where I disagree a little bit. He said that Trump clearly doesn't want this war. Well, in the end, Trump made that decision, and he's essentially gloated about it several times on social media, including flirting with regime change and like openly bringing up that term at a time when much of his base was saying, well, no, this isn't a regime change war. We don't intend to do that. But the biggest fear I have right now is a false flag attack on U.S. forces in that region. There's like 45,000 forces within Iran's striking distance. They can touch a lot of them. And you can believe it that this war will expand greatly, as he alludes to here, if U.S. soldiers in the region are touched. So Israel has the twisted incentive to want that to happen, to draw the U.S. into a regime change with boots on the ground and a long-lasting occupation, which is the last thing America can handle or needs right now. It's just dreadful to contemplate that.
That's a big mystery. Of course, as I said in my monologue, the IAEA say there's no radioactive material in the atmosphere. There's no sign of emission. And so either there was no material there in the first place, or it did not succeed in getting anywhere near it. And the Israelis are beginning to say that now. Channel 13 this evening said that you cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program by bombs. In which case, why go to war with them?
Well, I tend to agree with you, but there are two things that are now very clear. Number one is that Iran is going to double down on its war with Israel. In fact, within the next 2 weeks, I'd be surprised if Israel is not entirely destroyed. Secondly, Iran is receiving and will continue to receive enormous amounts of aid and support, particularly from Russia and China. Three, the Iranians have now collectively decided to close the Straits of Hormuz. There are 50 oil tankers sitting in the Gulf packed or filled with oil, ready to transport through the Straits of Hormuz. They're not going to move. They're going to sit there. They are now hostage to the closed straits. What are we in the United States going to do about that? Well, frankly, we don't draw on the oil from the Gulf for the most part. It's not going to make much difference to us, at least in the short run. But this is going to have a terrible impact on the rest of the world. There has been no thinking, once again, about the long-term strategic consequences. There was no thinking about, is this the right way to achieve the aim? Because if you're an Iranian right now, you're going to do everything in your power to build a nuclear weapon. In fact, I would argue that there will be countries all over the world that will now build nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to be visited by the United States Armed Forces in the middle of the night.
Yeah, totally agree with him on that. That's a point not many people are bringing up. If Iran didn't have, an expedited nuclear weapon process in the past, it's now ultimately incentivized to create one. Why wouldn't you? North Korea has one, and they're not flirting with regime change there after Bush called it part of the axis of evil, and Gaddafi gave away his nukes, his infantile nuclear weapons program in the mid-2000s, and then he was toppled by the U.S. So once you're in this situation, if you're Iran, you would want to get a nuclear weapon. This is one of the reasons why this strike was so disastrous, is it involves the U.S. in a power that is now encouraged to get one. The same thing that they said they had, which they didn't. Tulsi Gabbard 2 months ago said that there is no evidence they have one or have restarted their program. One day before this U.S. strike on Iran, she got onto Twitter and said, they're weeks away. It seems like she got compromised, but he's totally right. They're going to shut down oil productivity, oil shipment through the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran is going to dig their heels in support of their ally in Iran. It's a BRICS country. And this could jeopardize, I won't even say it can jeopardize, it will jeopardize, whatever semblance of a peace process still exists in Ukraine. Americans want peace in that war. They gave Trump a mandate to disengage from that war. Trump seems to want to be a deal maker and a peacemaker, but all he really would have to do for peace is withdraw all aid to Ukraine. So this has many ramifications, and again, many U.S. forces in the region that are susceptible to attacks, which would then draw the U.S. into a deeper conflict. That's what we do not want.
We are the threat. We are the rogue state supporting the other rogue state, Israel. And then finally, no mention is being made in this country in any way, shape, or form of what's happening in Gaza. There's a complete failure to understand that Gaza is the catalyst for the larger war that's now going to begin against Israel. Every Muslim country is going to come on board against Israel, along with Russia, along with China. I'd be surprised if Mr. Putin doesn't make it very clear to Mr. Netanyahu that if he contemplates using a nuclear weapon, he needs to understand something. If you do this, if you use a nuclear weapon against Iran or anyone in the Middle East, we will use a nuclear weapon against you. I'd be very surprised if he has not already said that.
Well, that's a big danger, too, the escalation of a potential nuclear war and nuclear rhetoric with different powers. I only agree with him partially in regard to all other countries in the region will come against the side of Israel. As long as the U.S. is giving Egypt, I think, about $3 billion a year, between $2 or $3 billion a year, I don't think Egypt is going to get involved anymore. They went to war with, Israel multiple times in the last century, in like the 60s and 70s, but their country, I think, will stay out of it. We're actually seeing Syria in on the side of Israel, too, which was taken over by remnants of ISIS, al-Shara and Jalani, who fought to, destroy the Assad regime and take power there. I guess now they're ostensive allies of Israel and the United States, even though there's al-Qaeda connections. It's just completely insane to me, but that is the reality in which we live now. So I don't think every country will, come in alignment against Israel, but I do worry about Russian support. This is now their proxy war. Iran is now their proxy fighting the U.S. and Israel in this war, in another theater. It's a total disaster.
We don't understand what we've walked into because we're not informed. We still think this is 1991. Listen to the rhetoric. I'm ready for peace now. We've made our point. We hope the Iranians understand us and will make peace. Have you lost your mind? The war is now just beginning.
Yes, it's not the beginning of the end, it's merely the end of the beginning, as Mr. Churchill said. Now, the impact of all this on Donald Trump's popularity, all the hypocrites are coming out. Nancy Pelosi is denouncing this lawless act of brigandry. All the Democrat hypocrites who would have done exactly the same thing. Of course, they represent nearly half of the American people. And therefore, how many of Trump's voters now desert him is going to be a huge factor in the midterms, isn't it? Its impact on MAGA is surely going to be significant, because this is a total about-face for the Donald Trump that people thought they were electing. This is the man who denounced the Iraq War, who denounced Obama, accused him of being ready to go to war with Iran in order to win an election. This is the Tulsi Gabbard who said just weeks ago that in terms there was no case for this kind of an action. When people do an about-face like that, they must lose a part of their base. How do you quantify that, Colonel?
Well, the desertions from so-called MAGA have already begun, because MAGA turns out to have been a myth. Let's be frank, it was never real. People voted for something that was never real. You've got to go back to the Republican National Convention. And during the Republican National Convention, there was a giant Israeli flag on the wall. And there was a placard above the flag that said, Israel first. And then a gentleman walked out to the podium, ostensibly representing the Israel lobby, and tried to lead cheers for Israel first. Well, the response was tepid, to say the least. But the people that voted for Donald Trump didn't understand what they were listening to. The signal was unambiguous and clear. You were voting for Israel first. And that's what you got for a cabinet. That's what you got for a government. Now, as you point out, that applied equally to the other side, regardless of what the other side says. We have a government in Washington that is corrupt to its core. It's corrupt, it's ineffective, it's incompetent. And that's what we are now going to discover in the days and weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, this is so right. He puts it so eloquently, too. It's exactly accurate that this government is won over by the Israel lobby. It didn't exactly make that unclear. It wasn't exactly ambiguous as to whether that would be the case. The cabinet is stacked with Zionists that are very loyal to Zionism. Miriam Adelson gave Trump $100 million for his campaign. Trump openly boasted about how close he was to the Adelsons and how much that, he would do for them more than any other person, essentially. And Galloway is right, too, when he talks about the potential schism that this will cause in the Trump coalition. Now, I'm seeing the most diehard Trumpians on social media dig in their heels and, promote this thing after years of raking the neocons over the coals for their foreign policy. But even if you look at people like Charlie Kirk's polls that he ran on his Twitter, 75% of his audience and the people that are sharing that tweet are against U.S. intervention in Iran. You see Matt Walsh coming out against it, Steve Bannon coming out against it, Tucker Carlson very strongly against it. So this is creating a schism, and I think it jeopardizes the rest of Trump's agenda. Now, I have no horse in that race, really. Actually, I disagree with some of Trump's agenda, but regardless of that, it does seem to create a fracture that will tank his popularity and his political capital, the ability to get things done that he wants, in a way that nothing else ever has, I believe.
The whole place is going to come apart because this war is going to expand. The family dictatorships that controlled the Arabian side of the Persian Gulf are not going to survive this. The Saudis are at high risk. Why are they at high risk? Why is King Abdullah in Jordan at high risk? Because there are hundreds of millions of Muslim Arabs that are saying this is unacceptable. This must stop. And you're going to see new governments come online. We are going to lose everything as a result of this overseas. We are inevitably going to be driven out of the Middle East. the thing that everyone said we were fighting to prevent. And we're going to watch Israel be destroyed day after day after day. In other words, the world is going to be turned upside down. Everything that we've supposedly worked for decades will be lost. Now, in the long run, this is a damn good thing for us. We need to get out of these places. We need to come home. And we haven't even talked about the potential for really bad things to happen inside the United States. Set aside the very likely financial meltdown that is coming. As soon as we start to lose troops, men, people, ships, anything, you're going to see the stock market react very negatively. That's not just the market, but we have the bond market. You're going to watch the interest rates rise. We're going to try and suppress the inevitable inflation that results. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen. And as these things grow worse, the demand here at home for change in everything. Most important, change overseas. Come home. No more wars. That pressure is going to be overwhelming. Doesn't matter who is in Washington and what they say. They're all going to confront this. So this is a in the language of fools in Washington, a game changer, as though this were a game. This is a strategic sea change. We don't get it, and we're not going to get it until all of the bad things happen that are coming. And by the way, there are a lot of people that are in the intelligence business that are professional who are now worried about terrible things happening here inside the United States. Our borders were open for years, George. We don't know who's in the country. We have people worried about the explosion of a dirty bomb inside our borders. And we should be worried, extremely worried. But until these things happen, the American people will not really wake up. They may walk away from Donald Trump and say, what a mistake we made, but they're not going to demand real action until they're hurt. That's coming.
Yeah, may very well be true. Americans feel the wrath and, destructive impulses toward their personal lives most when it affects their economics, what they can buy, how much things cost, how much their taxes are, etc. All of which are things that are influenced by these wars. These wars are financed through central banking and printing money to finance them, which is essentially a hidden clandestine tax that is imposed on all of us. But, he's probably right about Americans not really feeling this at home until those ramifications happen over a longer stretch. The average American doesn't care that much about foreign policy. Activists certainly do. The activist bases of politicians and politics and political parties certainly do. But yeah, this is going to have bad consequences. The U.S. is wrapped up in yet another entangling alliance. I should say this entangling alliance has lasted something like 80 years, but this is really coming to a really negative point. We've been involved in so many wars. It seems like Israel is the enemy of the United States in so many ways. It doesn't benefit us at all. They are not the ally of the United States. The United States is an ally of Israel. We dump money into their coffers for the sake of Netanyahu. Macgregor talked a little bit about Gaza there too. I do believe that this is at least partially to take eyes off of what's happening there. You have IDF soldiers shooting at people, receiving aid, and the Israeli government even admitting it. The Israeli government talking about literal concentration zones, one of which will be in Rafah, to put Palestinians in. It just seems really horrific on a level that we haven't really seen, but now all eyes are on Iran, so you don't hear as much talk about that. And, all this is going to come to a halt the moment there's a serious attack and a nuclear weapon is deployed, and I just pray that that doesn't happen, or that U.S. troops don't get targeted and attacked, and thus the U.S. get drawn into this deeper than we already have been, which is already a calamity.
As the meme says, doesn't matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. Do you think there was any real opposition inside the leadership on this, or was that too deception?
I have trouble believing anything that comes out of the government these days. I have to be frank. I know there's an awful lot of theater that goes on to try and entertain people and make them think something's happening that isn't. These people are feckless. They don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand what they've done. There's not a shred of humanity in any of them. One look at Gaza alone should be enough to drive people completely out of the region and say, no more, no more cooperation, no collaboration against anyone with Israel until Gaza stops. It never comes up. It's not on television. And if it's not on television for most Americans, it probably doesn't exist.
Finally, Colonel, and here I draw on your diplomatic and other skills. If I were a Russian leader and Mr. Witkoff, say, or Mr. Rubio came to talk with me, I would have difficulty keeping a straight face as they made commitments or expressed intentions, because I would say, I've just watched you in real time deceive your own people, deceive the world about your true intentions with regard to Iran. Isn't this a potential death blow to American credibility diplomatically?
Absolutely. No one believes anything we say anymore. So that would be a complete waste of time. No one believes that we can be trusted any longer. This is a death blow for that purpose.
Absolutely. You see that not only here, where it looks like that the U.S. delegation duped the Iranians, at least at some point of those negotiations, switching from a demand of no nuclear weapons program to no nuclear enrichment, which would tank all of Iran's nuclear power program. It just was a non-starter. And that's when it seemed to me the moment where it probably was the case that, Trump had decided to collaborate with Netanyahu and strategize over this and how to play it out. And he essentially admitted that. At least he admitted in his 4-minute speech talking about the strike and how wildly successful it was that he had been working with Netanyahu. And it's been all, propaganda since then, mission accomplished. You had Pete Hegseth spending, the first few minutes of his press conference talking about how great Trump is, how successful this was, but this is not. This is a blunder for the United States. I don't agree as much with Macgregor that Trump ultimately didn't want this. I do think Trump caved to this, and at some point he has to bear responsibility for it. It's not just him being duped, and don't get me wrong, the Israel lobby has sank its fangs into him, but ultimately he is complicit with this too. And I also want to say that I like George Galloway a lot more than Douglas Murray. He's a lot better of a Brit on foreign policy, that's for sure.
In the meantime, though, the Russians are bearing down on Kiev. Large numbers of their troops are moving offensively to the west. They're going to cross that river. They will move on Kiev, and they will move south towards Odessa. That's a foregone conclusion. And they can do that while they simultaneously support and assist Iran. I guess Russia just isn't as weak, backward, and incompetent as everybody said. And by the way, neither is Iran.
No.
Yeah, I just want to comment too. Macgregor's totally right about how this just, puts the final nails in the coffin of whatever existed of trust that other powers have in the U.S. to do these duplicitous negotiations with Iran, only to bail out of them, say that it's Iran that tanked the deal when it seems to have been the U.S. It's just the same along the lines of what happened in Minsk too, where U.S. peace delegations supposedly were negotiating in bad faith, at least during part of that. Now, I know Tucker Carlson disputes that. He says, I know they weren't trying to do that. Witkoff was really trying to, come to an agreement there, a new JCPOA-like agreement. But it really seems like that changed when the demands of that delegation changed. It has to have happened at some point. So, yeah, Macgregor's right here, and no one really trusts the U.S. Who could? And if I'm looking to secure peace in Ukraine, I kind of care if other powers, and in particular Russia, trust me. But I don't really think that's the goal. I think that war was always designed to be an endless war, not a successful war. It's just designed to launder money out of the tax base of the U.S. and provide it to the military-industrial complex and antagonize Russia at the same time. Always has been.
Absolutely correct. But what about China? Might this be an opportune time for China to make a move on reunification with Taiwan?
China doesn't have to do that. Taiwan will voluntarily join China. That's a lot of nonsense. Neither the Chinese on Taiwan nor the Chinese on the mainland are interested in going to war with anybody for any reason. They're all about business. Their long-term goal is to end up looking a lot like Singapore. That's their model. This is not a warlike nation by any stretch of the imagination. You know, somebody was telling me the other day, doesn't President Trump understand the reason so many of our ships are so rusty is that they are at sea all the time? He keeps pointing to the Chinese ships, says they're not rusty. Well, of course they're not rusty because they spend most of their time in port.
Yeah, this is a good point. I'm so glad he has this view on China because so many people on the populist right do not. You know, much of the propaganda we hear about China is like, oh, they're going to invade Taiwan every day. That is a piece of propaganda to drum up additional antagonism toward China, more military buildup in the Pacific, which is working. That has happened over the last few years. More and more money has been devoted to that, even during the Biden administration. So this is not just with the right, but the right-wing rhetoric toward China is often very bellicose, and I'm so glad to hear him talk about that. China's not a warlike nation. I don't think that China's gone to war since its war in Tibet, maybe, really. I mean, obviously, the murderous dictatorship of Mao Zedong was torturous and treacherous, but before that, I guess they got involved in Korea, but there weren't that many Chinese wars since then in the last 60 years. Meanwhile, the U.S. is trying to exert its will all across the world, and we're here to believe, some people on the right are going to say that China's the biggest threat to your liberty. Well, no, it's your own government getting you embroiled in these disasters as they're doing in Ukraine and Iran and in Gaza, which isn't even a war, that's a genocide. So Macgregor is absolutely correct about China here. They don't have the will to attack other countries militarily, and especially not the United States. And a lot of what you hear about them invading Taiwan is propaganda.
Well, if you spend most of your time in port as a Navy, how good are you? The Chinese are not interested in a war. That's all crap. But the Chinese are very interested in doing business. And you pointed to BRICS, and you pointed to the one belt, one road, and you're 100% correct. Iran is vital and essential to that project. And it's also vital and essential to Russian national security because it touches the soft underbelly of Russia, which is Central Asia.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He is so true here. BRICS is a new and up-and-coming alliance that involves China, Russia, and Iran. And Iran is a BRICS country. This conflict, in addition to the Ukraine conflict, will drive Russia more closely into the arms of China. So now you have two of the biggest nuclear powers in the world against the United States. That's not what I want there to be. That's a disaster. I'll say a lot of bad things about Richard Nixon, but one of the best things that he did as president, maybe the only good thing, if you ask me, is he really separated and drove a huge wedge between the Chinese and Soviets in a time where there was a fallout before that point between the Chinese and Soviets, but he made it impossible for that to be an adversarial union against the United States. Well, that's all gone now. You see those two powers closer than ever together, and though they don't want war, they pose a formidable challenge to the U.S. And, getting involved in these proxy wars, they will fund the other sides up. They will be funding Iran, and that's just one of the disastrous consequences of this. Inflation's a consequence, how this will affect the treasury market's a consequence, the stock market that he talked about, trust abroad, how this impacts negotiations that the U.S. wants to do with other powers in the future has to be irreparably damaged from this. So there are so many ramifications beyond the lives lost in all this, and Macgregor is totally right to point that out. But I do want to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with Macgregor regarding Iran, the disaster that it is, and the ramifications it will have on foreign policy and U.S. policy going forward? And do you agree with him that this is going to be a long, hard war if the U.S. expands it? Let me know down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please consider becoming a YouTube member or Patreon patron to support the channel. I'd really appreciate that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.